All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Indigo Women podcast. My name is Natalie. I am the owner and creator of the Indigo Women. Our mission is to provide elevated, soul-powered women with the sisterhood and support that they need so they may release limiting beliefs, claim their wholeness, and lead from their highest and most authentic self. So welcome to the second episode of our podcast. Today, I have a podcast microphone, so the quality is getting better. We are getting there. I definitely anticipate the quality of this podcast live stream to improve over time. I'm one of those people that needs to learn as I go. So I'm sure that the quality is going to improve as we continue. And I appreciate you bearing with me as I figure out how to be a podcast host. So today our topic of discussion is befriending your ego. And I am so excited to talk about this topic with you all because learning how to befriend my ego has probably been one of the most impactful things that I have learned on my healing journey. This is also a topic that we would likely be able to talk about for hours and hours and hours, and I do intend to revisit this topic in the future. So if you have commentary on anything that I say today, whether it's in agreement or disagreement, or if you want to add in your own insights, I would be more than happy to hear them. So please feel free to engage, leave comments, shoot me an email, theindigowomen@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts. The more that we can have an active discussion about this, the better, because I think that people who can share their opinions and ideas and experiences in a concise way with one another, that's a group of people that can really learn and grow as a collective group, as a community, and I'm super into that idea. So I do want to throw in a few disclaimers. The first is that everything that I share in this video today is going to be, this podcast episode, live stream, video, the whole thing. This is all my own personal experiences. So I don't claim to be an expert in life. I'm just a traveler like anybody else. I'm just passing through. But I would like to share the insights that I have gathered throughout my 32 years. And you're probably going to notice that there are a lot of philosophies that I lean on in my own personal philosophy. So it's important to know that I have been a yoga teacher for 10 years. So a lot of my philosophies about the ego are rooted in yogic tradition. I'm also a student of A Course in Miracles. So if you're not familiar with A Course in Miracles, I highly recommend checking it out. There's also a bunch of authors such as Marianne Williamson and Gabby Bernstein who give incredible insights with A Course in Miracles being the backbone of their work. So you're going to see a lot of that sort of jargon and terminology within my own personal testament of the ego. I also have a background in psychology, so I have degrees in art therapy and psychology, and you're going to hear a lot of that sort of influence on my experience. And then I have tons and tons of personal experience with my own ego and my own higher self-consciousness that will be informing this episode. So that is my disclaimer. I am a Mod Podge of a million different ideas and traditions and books that I've read and people that I've learned from and articles and content that I've consumed. But this is really just my personal experience of befriending my own ego. And your experience and your stories are also more than welcome here. So please feel free to share. I would also like to state as well that my own personal background is that I was raised very, very Catholic. So I was raised very religious. And then I went through a period of time when I was 19, 20 years old, where I renounced all religion, all spirituality. I thought the whole thing was just BS. If you want to learn more about that, you can go back to episode 1 of this podcast. I go more in depth in the story. But then over the last 10 years, I have really reconnected with my own spirituality, and I use my own heart and intuition as a compass and as a guide. So that's where I feel that I have the most conviction, is through my own experience and my own relationship with myself. So although I do take a lot of ideas from yoga and A Course in Miracles and psychology and conversations that I've had with other people and just, learning along the way, everything that I say today on this episode is really coming from my heart. So yes, that is the whole disclaimer. I wanted to put that all out there at the beginning so that I don't have to preface every single sentence with, in my opinion and in my experience. So just please assume this whole thing is my opinion and my experience, okay? All right, cool. Now let's go ahead and jump in. So if we're going to talk about befriending our ego, it's really important to define what the ego is. And also, what is the opposite of the ego? So I tend to consider the ego the part of us that forgets that we are connected to everything. Okay, so in my personal philosophy and personal understanding of the universe, this whole entire thing, the planets, the cosmos, the ants on the ground, the flowers and trees outside, all of it is all part of a single solitary fabric. And this fabric can be seen as, quantum entanglement, quantum physics in the scientific realms, but it can also just be seen as source. Every single thing that we can perceive, everything that we can sense with our senses, all comes from this same source energy. And the things that make the difference, so the thing that differentiates me from my desk and from my computer and from you, is simply illusion. That is my personal understanding of this world. All of it is source, which can also be a different word for God, for the universe, whatever. All of it is this one thing, and anything that is seen as different is illusion. So again, Course in Miracles jargon here, the whole thing is just source or God or the universe, and anything that differentiates one piece from another is simply illusion. It is my understanding that it is the ego that creates this illusion of separateness. So the truth is that everything is connected, everything is one, and the illusion is that separateness exists. Okay? If I've completely lost you, no worries. There's some amazing books out there that really break it down. A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson is my all-time favorite for really breaking down these principles. So I'm going to highly recommend that book if you'd like to learn more about it. But if I still have your attention, if you're still vibing along, if you're still like, yeah, Nat, I can get on board with that, awesome. Let's just keep it moving and grooving. So I tend to think of the ego as the part of us that forgets that we are source energy, okay? In my mind, there is this beautiful source energy all over the place that remembers its wholeness, that is comprised of unconditional love, that is the wisdom and just the grandeur of the universe. And our little soul is part of that whole big thing. It is source energy, okay? And there is a part of us that remembers that. So in my mind, the part of us that remembers is our higher self. There is this soul seed inside of us that remembers we are part of this entire universe. We're not just part of it, but we are the universe, and the universe is us. There is no separation between here and there. The whole thing is connected, and our higher self, our source energy, our soul seed knows that and remembers the fact that we are infinite. However, we decided, this little piece of us, this little soul seed, and I'm not going to pretend to fully understand it, but I tend to imagine that there is a piece of us, a soul seed, that has chosen to come down to Earth School so that we can experience what it is like to have an ego, to experience what it is like to sense the illusion of separateness. I genuinely believe that when our souls are not in our bodies, we can remember that we are whole 24/7. There is no differentiation. We are part of the cosmic whole. But because that we are this little piece of consciousness that wanted to experience separateness, we committed for a very finite period of time to be in an earth body, to have a human experience. And it is this human experience that creates the ego. The ego and the human experience, in my understanding, is synonymous. In order to be a human, we have chosen to take on an ego, because the ego is the only way that we are going to be able to perceive the illusion of separateness. So why on earth would we want that? It's my personal understanding and personal belief that the reason why we choose to have a human experience, the reason why we choose to have an ego for a finite period of time, is so that our souls can have the experience of the joy of remembering. We have to forget in order to remember. I believe that when we are simply in our soul form, we're not in our body, in like this human body form, we're simply in soul form, we never forget that we're part of the whole. We remember that we are a source because it's obvious. We're not experiencing illusion, we're experiencing truth and unconditional love. But that can get kind of boring, right? We can forget what we have. So we come down into this human body, and I say come down, but it's not necessarily down. Maybe we come over, maybe we go up. I don't know the direction. The cosmos is a crazy place, right? Directions probably don't even exist. But there's some part of us that has chosen to take on this role of illusion so that we can experience the joy of remembering. And you have to forget in order to remember. So it's interesting when I think of my biblical background, and there's this idea of original sin in the Catholic Bible, right? And it's always told as the story of Adam and Eve, and she bites the apple and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that's what original sin is. The more that I learn and experience life, and also listen to other people's perspectives, I can't help but feel as though original sin is simply forgetting who we actually are. And I really love the idea that sin isn't this awful, evil thing. It's simply forgetting our true nature. This reframe of religious jargon really did a lot for me. It helped me feel a lot better because in my Catholic upbringing, sinning meant being bad. And like, you are bad because you sin. But I really like the idea of sin as an archery term, which meant to miss the mark. It didn't mean you were a bad person. It meant that you were having an experience and you missed the mark in some way. You forgot your perfection in that moment. You forgot that you're infinite. You forgot that you're connected to source at all times. You forgot that your soul is part of this conscious cosmos of incredible unconditional love. You forgot. It's okay. You're a person. It's not a problem. Don't worry. You'll get it next time. And I felt that that really softened the blow of that word. So specifically, when we're talking about original sin, I started to think of that as, oh, this was me originally choosing to forget my infinite nature so that I could go down to Earth School. I can experience having an ego. I can experience the guilt, the shame, the grief, all the emotions that are really only available in this human form. And there's no way that it would be available when I'm remembering that I am source energy and that I am part of unconditional love, right? If you always remember that you are part of unconditional love, you're never going to have that experience of guilt and shame and grief and hurt and anger and pain, because that just isn't part of your view. There has to be that illusion of separateness in order to experience these other emotions. And I truly believe that the reason why we want to experience those emotions is so that we can experience the joy of remembering that we are more than those negative emotions. Not everyone's going to remember it, but a lot of us are, and a lot of us can. If you can start to find the gratitude of everyday living, that's when you start to remember and you start stepping into that higher self-consciousness. You'll be able to remember more and more and more. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me go back to the ego, right? So it's also my understanding that the reason why we have this ego and the purpose of the ego is to help us to survive. It is crucial to our survival to have an ego. The ego is the protector. And this makes perfect sense to me, because if you didn't have the ego, if you were 100% pure unconditional love, there would be zero need for your human body and you'd go right back where you came from. Survival would be unnecessary. Your human experience wouldn't have to be there anymore because you would just remember you are pure love. Okay, bye. Your body's no longer needed. So the ego is no longer needed. So the ego is essential for our survival. It keeps us in our bodies so that we can complete this finite human experience. Okay. So I tend to think of this as a bit of a sliding scale, because as we move through human experience, there's going to be times where we are feeling really in our ego. This is when emotions of, again, the shame, the fear, the guilt, the heaviness of being alive is upon us, and we feel separate and we feel alone. That is when our ego is at its strongest, and it is really dictating our experience. But then there's this other side of the scale, which is when we are in our higher self-consciousness. And this is when we are remembering, oh my God, I am infinite. I am a co-creator. I am part of this big, beautiful thing that is life. I'm grateful for every experience I've ever had, painful, happy, or otherwise. And I'm in this state of flow. So as we move through life, we're going to fluctuate between the two. Sometimes the ego is going to be in charge, and we're going to feel a lot of pain and a lot of resentment and a lot of difficulty. And sometimes the higher self-consciousness will be in charge. And that's when we're going to experience synchronicities and love and passion and inspiration and creativity and joy. And the human experience is all about remembering that truth of our being, and also forgetting and slipping down into the ego so that we can enjoy the experience of remembering again. Okay. So why is it important for us to befriend our ego? Like, why can't we just be like, okay, it's actually really annoying that I have this thing that makes me feel shame and guilt and pain. And I really would just prefer not to. And that's totally fine. If you get to points with your ego where you're just like, oh my God, really? Like, I'm tired of carrying this thing around with me, this dark energy with me. Why is this here? This is so annoying. I don't want to be friends with it. That's fine. But babe, it's you. Your ego is part of you. Your ego is part of the you that you chose to be in this human form. So if you are on a mission of self-love, if you are on a mission of self-acceptance, if you are on a mission of really embodying the truth of who you are, then being friends with this piece of yourself is very, very important. Anything that you exile, anything that you reject, anything that you push away will come back in other ways. Every part of you wants to be seen and experienced during this human experience of being a person. It all wants to be seen and heard and acknowledged. And all of these little parts of your ego, shame, guilt, grief, rage, frustration, the list goes on. They are indicators of unmet needs. And most of those unmet needs can go back to the root of love and acceptance. It means that there's something within you that is not being loved and accepted. So I tend to think of it as these difficult emotions. I'm going to stop listing them because I've listed them like 10 times. You know what I'm talking about when I say difficult emotions, the ones that are really, really rooted in the ego. When they come up, they often present as this scary monster, whether it's the shame or the anxiety or just like the heaviness of these emotions. They're scary to us a lot of the time. But when we give them the space to fully express and we get curious about them, we cultivate friendly curiosity, we ask them, why are you here? And what can I learn from you? Peeling back those layers often reveals an unmet need. It often reveals a part of us that just wants to be held and integrated and seen and loved. And as we give love to those little bits of our ego, it starts to calm down. That's the thing. When our ego is throwing all these temper tantrums, it can be very overwhelming. But if we can get very present with ourselves and allow these bits and pieces and parts of our ego to show themselves, and we talk to those pieces, we get to know those pieces. Maybe even we take those pieces to therapy or we share those pieces with a loved one. Those pieces can be seen. We can identify the unmet need that's underneath, and then we can fulfill that need. And the need is almost always acknowledgement and love. The more that we can do that for each little piece of our ego, the more that we will feel like fully integrated human beings. Our inner world will stop feeling like this shattered, chaotic place, because each and every part of ourselves is being seen and heard and held and loved. This is the process of befriending the ego. So the question is, what happens if you deny or repress your ego? And I think that some great examples of that come up in religion and in cults and in places where the ego is seen as something that is separate from you. So, for example, with my Catholic upbringing, I was always told of Satan and the devil and Lucifer, right? And these were these outer characters that were always red with horns and tails and like creepy pointy features, right? And these little insidious monsters were there to pull me away from God, right? All these sins and temptations. And it was always this kind of separate creature. And we were sort of taught to like deny this temptation or shove it down or repress it or tell it no. And that was supposed to be like the right thing to do, right? But what happens is that when that's taken to an extreme, you can see that in spiritual leaders that have massive downfalls. There's been countless accounts of these spiritual leaders in quotes or cult leaders who on the outside try to show that they have like this very, very pure way of living and that they're in this very high self-consciousness, but in reality, they have this extremely unchecked ego, and eventually the needs of that ego become ferocious, and all of a sudden everything explodes and everyone can see this ego that was never seen or integrated. So if these needs, because at the end of the day, all these little bits and pieces of your ego are simply unmet needs, if they are being repressed and denied and exiled, they will get louder and louder and louder until they explode. And even though this like cult leader sort of example is an extreme one, this same sort of thing can happen even in our own daily lives as average people. If we look at our ego as something that is evil and outside of ourselves, we are more likely to exile it, repress it, and push it down until it gets so loud that it explodes in addiction, fits of rage, anxiety, depression, etc., mental health crises. There's so many ways that an unseen ego can really take charge of someone. So if we simply look at our ego differently, we can start to see it as it really is. So instead of assigning a visual to it as this bearded, pointy man with horns and a tail, and you guys have all seen, you've all seen the visual of the devil or Satan or whatever. Instead of personifying it as this very evil thing, we can change the way that we look at it. And the way that I started to look at my ego that totally changed my life was beginning to view it as a teacher. It is a teacher. It is an integral part of my growth. It's not evil. It's not scary. It's not something that is out to get me. It is something that is here to teach me something. It is my teacher. And I remember the first time that this idea was introduced to me, it was probably about 10 years ago. I had a spiritual teacher who said, in some schools of thought, Lucifer is one of the archangels. And I went, what? No, he's the fallen angel. He's the rejected angel. And she was like, not with everybody. Some view him as the teacher. I was floored. I was shocked. Lucifer as a teacher? Really? But then I started to think about it. If all we ever knew was love and joy and hope and acceptance and peace, what would we have to learn? It's all of these little challenges that help us to grow, that help us to have this full and complete and well-rounded experience of human life. So it goes back to what I was saying before. When we encounter these challenges of the ego, these difficult emotions, whatever it is that our ego is presenting us with, we are forgetting what we really are, but then we get to have that joy of remembering once the lesson is integrated. Once we integrate our ego lessons, we get to experience that joy of remembering. And you can get really good at this. This is actually a skill that you can start to get really good at, where every time your ego presents you with the next challenge, you immediately ask yourself, what do I need? And what can I learn? If every emotion, if every difficult emotion is met with that friendly curiosity of those two questions, what do I need and what can I learn? We can go back to remembering our higher self-consciousness that much more quickly. And in the process, we'll get to learn some really cool things about ourselves. We get to learn more about the nature of the universe and human nature, and really sucking the juice out of this human experience. Again, it's a finite experience, right? We're not here forever. We don't get to stick around in our bodies forever. We're here for a little bit. But while we're here, why not suck the juice out of it? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to start seeing these difficult emotions as teachers, as a way to learn and to grow and to expand your consciousness and to live. Just live. One of my favorite things that I learned is from my friend Becky, who went through a huge loss when she was 10 years old. She lost her mom. And she has devoted her life to helping others work through grief. And one of her biggest tools in her tool belt is teaching her clients to ask themselves, instead of why did this happen, what can I do now? Okay. The question why can sometimes get us stuck in spirals. Unfortunately, we don't always have the answers to the question of why. We don't always know why, especially when difficult things happen, especially when transforming things happen, when traumas happen, when really, really big earth-shattering things happen. We don't always know why, and we probably never will know why. And if we sit there and try to speculate why, it can give our ego a lot of opportunity to run us around in circles. But instead, if we ask ourselves, what can I do? What can I do? That puts the power back in your hands. Speculating why can be very disempowering, but asking yourself, what can I do now, can be very, very empowering. It can ignite our higher self-consciousness. It can help us to take steps forward and maybe even help us find purpose in whatever it is that we're going through. That's another beautiful thing about our ego. I can tell you that the most difficult things that I've been through, the shame and the guilt and the grief, have been the catalyst for me finding my purpose. And I have seen this time and time again with other people within my community, within my life. Those really big earth-shattering events where our survival is so threatened, whether emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever, there's a lot of different realms in which our survival or our perception of survival can be threatened. My survival felt so threatened that my ego got so big and so loud in order to protect me. And then I spent years unraveling those bits and pieces that attempted to protect my survival. And in that unraveling, in that integration, in asking myself, what can I learn and what do I need? I found my purpose. I found my reason. I created the why for myself. I have decided why all of that happened to me. And the way that I was able to do that was by asking myself again and again, what can I do now? What do I need? What can I learn? What can I do? Now, this process of befriending the ego, this process of seeing our ego as a teacher, comes with a lot of emotions. So what can you expect as you're learning to befriend your ego? You can definitely expect a lot of emotional releases. That's a good thing. If you're a crier like me, I'm sorry, but also you're not alone. Anytime that I have like a big integration moment of a piece of my ego, bringing that piece back into the whole, bringing one of those exiles back in and saying, I see you, I love you, I accept you. I'm sorry that I ever rejected you, but you're safe now. I love you. I've learned from you. Thank you. If you're familiar with Ho'oponopono, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. If you can say that to every little piece of your ego, you are going to be vibing in higher self-consciousness in no time. That is such a powerful prayer. And we'll talk about that again at a later time, but you can expect that as you integrate these pieces of the ego, as you learn the lessons that your ego is teaching you, as you remember your wholeness, as you bring it all in, as you forgive yourself, you are going to feel a heck of a lot of emotions. I think my biggest ones have been grief and frustration. Those are my biggies. With grief, I tend to just give myself space to cry, but I cry with purpose. I cry knowing that the tears that I'm shedding are helping me to become more whole. I cry with the intention of learning from whatever it is I'm crying over. And if I'm feeling frustration and rage, I channel this in different ways. Sometimes I beat the crap out of pillows. Sometimes I will go to a very loud waterfall and just scream over the sound. That's a good one. I love yelling very loudly. It's a good one for getting the rage and frustration out. Sometimes I just write frantically. Sometimes I just ask a friend or my partner to listen as I vent whatever I need to vent. But again, it's always with the intention of getting to the other side of this emotional expression so that I can find the lesson and integrate it. And then thank my ego for being my teacher, because it's just getting me a little bit more clear on my life path. It's getting me a little bit more clear about my purpose. It's giving me a why. The more that I ask, what can I do? The more that I learn why I'm here and why I'm going through what I'm going through. It's also important to know that as you befriend your ego, you're likely going to run into some sticky beliefs. I call these ones onions. There are some beliefs in our subconscious mind that are very easy to shift, but a lot of them come with layers and layers. So sometimes it takes patience. You might have a belief that you think is just one thing, but then as you unpeel that first layer, the next layer appears, and you got to unpeel that one as well. So some beliefs are actually onions, and they require a lot of love and a lot of patience with yourself. But knowing that unpeeling that onion layer by layer is going to pay off with a beautiful life lesson and a beautiful return to yourself, return to who you truly are. I think it's also important to point out that as you go through this journey of befriending your ego, oftentimes you will find that the fear of expressing your emotions is actually way more painful than the emotions themselves. So sometimes we're afraid of expressing our grief. We're afraid of expressing our anger or rage or frustration. And it's really the fear that is the most painful part. If we can create a safe enough space for ourselves, whether it's in therapy or in a safe relationship with a friend or partner or in nature where we feel very, very safe and secure, if we can create that safe space for ourselves and we can have that expression, have that release, at least for me, I often tend to find that the expression of the emotion, I'll get to the end of it and go, what the heck was I so afraid of? Why did I avoid that for so long? That actually felt good. It was a little weird at the beginning. I mean, nobody loves, crying their eyes out usually. But when I get to the end of it, it's such a catharsis. It's such a release. It's like being reborn. It's a new beginning. And that's a beautiful thing. And again, this gets easier with practice. The more that we give ourselves permission to express the emotions that need to be expressed so that we can learn and grow and move on, the easier it gets in time. So I want to end this particular podcast live stream by simply inviting you to imagine that your mind is like a garden, okay? And within that garden, there's a lot of beautiful flowers and also plenty of weeds. And the flowers are those beautiful thoughts about yourself that remind you of your higher self-consciousness. They remind you that you are part of something that is infinitely loving, that is full of unconditional and universal love for you. You are part of that. It is you. You carry it inside of you. These flowers of this beautiful higher self-consciousness belief are scattered all throughout your mind. And it's the ego that plants those weeds, right? Those weeds that say, oh, you're not good enough, or you should be ashamed of that, or you should be sad about X, Y, and Z. And what we can do over time is we can take that conscious effort to pull up those weeds one by one. And as we pull them up, as we pull up a weed of the ego, of the subconscious mind, we say, Thank you. Thank you for contributing to my survival. For whatever reason, you were planted because you helped me to survive at one point or another. And I appreciate that. I'm grateful that you did your job, but this is no longer needed. Thank you for the lesson. I'm integrating what you have taught me, and now I release you. We forgive ourselves, we forgive the weed, we thank it for doing what it needed to do, and then we kindly and gently let it go. And we plant a new flower in its place. And bit by bit, the entire garden of our mind can be transformed. I love this visualization. It makes me so happy. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Again, I am really enjoying these podcast episodes. They are going to get better and the quality will get better with time. So I appreciate you bearing with me. Next week, we are going to be hosting our first guest, Cricket. Cricket is a ceremonialist for the Indigo Women. And next week is summer solstice. So our episode will be devoted to a summer solstice ceremony. I hope that you tune in. And if in the meantime, you are looking for more tools for cultivating the garden of your mind, for learning to be friends with your ego, please do not hesitate to reach out. Our website is theindigowomen.com. You can also reach out to us in our Facebook group of the same name, on Instagram at @theindigowomen, or send us an email, theindigowomen@gmail.com. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you, and I'll see you again next week. Have a great day. Bye.